Libra, let me ask you something. Why does it feel like everything in your life shifted, even though nothing dramatic happened on the outside? Why do you suddenly feel less willing to explain yourself, less patient with imbalance, less available for what used to drain you? This isn't exhaustion, and it's not confusion. It's the moment after a long cycle ends. The moment when the universe quietly moves you out of a place you've already outgrown. If you've been sensing a strange calm mixed with tension, like something irreversible has already been decided, this message is for you. Stay with me. Trust yourself, because what comes next was never meant to happen loudly, but it was meant to change everything. Libra, I want you to imagine this moment as if it's just you and me here. No noise, no expectations, just a quiet space where you don't have to explain who you are or why you feel the way you do. Because lately, something inside you has been shifting in a way that's hard to name. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just unfamiliar. It's like waking up one morning and realizing the room feels different, even though the furniture hasn't moved. The air sits differently in your chest. Your patience runs out faster. Your tolerance for imbalance feels thinner than it used to be. And maybe you wondered, just for a second, is something wrong with me, or am I finally seeing clearly? You see, Libra, you've always had a rare gift, the ability to feel both sides, to hold the weight of other people's emotions without dropping your own, to smooth edges, to keep the peace, even when it cost you more than you ever admitted out loud. But there comes a point in every balanced soul's life when balance stops meaning self-sacrifice and starts meaning self-respect. That point doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic ending. It arrives quietly, almost gently. You might notice it when something that once mattered deeply suddenly feels distant, or when a familiar dynamic no longer fits the version of you standing here now, or when your body reacts before your mind can explain why. That's not confusion, Libra. That's alignment beginning to reorganize your life from the inside out. And here's the part most people don't talk about. When a long cycle ends, there is often a strange pause, a moment where you feel suspended, not where you used to be, not yet where you're going. That in-between space can feel unsettling, but it's also sacred. It's the space where the universe quietly adjusts things behind the scenes, without asking for permission, without requiring you to push or prove or perform. Have you noticed how lately you're less interested in convincing anyone of your worth? How silence feels more powerful than explanation? How walking away feels cleaner than staying to be misunderstood? That's not withdrawal. That's evolution. And if part of you feels a calm mixed with tension, like something irreversible has already been set in motion, you're not imagining it. Something has shifted, not on the surface, but at the level where roles dissolve and new positions form. So before we go any further, let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you allowed yourself to admit that you've outgrown a version of life you worked very hard to survive? Take a breath here. There's no rush, because what you're stepping into now isn't about effort, it's about placement. About finally being moved out of spaces that could only meet the old you. And as we move forward, I want you to listen not just with your ears, but with that quiet knowing inside you, the one that's been whispering for a while now. This next part of the story doesn't begin with action. It begins with recognition, with noticing the moment when nothing seems different, yet everything already is. Libra, stay right here with me for a moment. Don't rush past this feeling. Because this part of the story isn't loud. It's honest. For a long time, you tried to do what felt right. Not impressive, not dramatic, just right. You chose fairness when it would have been easier to choose yourself. You chose patience when something inside you was already tired. You chose understanding again and again, even when no one asked how much it was costing you. And you didn't complain. That's the part most people never saw. You told yourself it would balance out eventually, that if you stayed calm, things would settle. That peace was worth the weight you were carrying. But here's something I want to say to you gently, as someone who understands your kind of heart. Peace that requires you to disappear is not peace. It's postponement. You stayed longer than you should have, yes. Not because you were weak, but because you believed in people. Because you believed harmony could heal imbalance if you gave it enough time. And maybe, for a while, it did. Until one day, it didn't. The universe notices patterns, Libra. Not intentions, not explanations, patterns. And when it sees you consistently choosing harmony at the expense of self-respect, it doesn't punish you. It intervenes. Not suddenly, not cruelly, but precisely. That's why this shift didn't arrive with fireworks. It didn't come because you demanded change. It came because you endured in silence long enough that endurance itself became the signal. Have you felt that quiet exhaustion lately? Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from holding things together that were never meant to be held by you alone. That wasn't failure, that was information. There's a moment every balanced soul reaches when staying kind starts to feel like self-betrayal. And when that moment arrives, something deeper takes over. You may have noticed it in small ways. A shorter tolerance for being misunderstood. A stronger reaction to subtle disrespect. A sudden clarity about what you will no longer explain. That's not bitterness, Libra. That's discernment. And it's happening now because you are no longer meant to prove your value through patience. You are meant to live from a position where your value is assumed. So let me ask you something softly, not to pressure you, but to invite honesty. If nothing in your life were to change on the outside, would you still be willing to keep paying the same emotional price inside? Take a breath before you answer that. There's no right response, only truth. Because what's unfolding now isn't about correcting the past. It's about preventing you from repeating it. The universe didn't wait for you to break. It moved you before that could happen. And as we continue, I want you to notice how this story isn't pulling you backward into what you survived. It's gently guiding you forward into what you're finally ready to stand inside of. There's more light ahead, not because life suddenly became easy, but because you no longer have to dim yourself to keep it balanced. And that realization, that quiet, steady realization, is where the next layer begins. Libra, let this part arrive slowly, not as a conclusion, but as a soft realization settling into your body. There is a chapter closing now, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with a quiet understanding that something has run its course. For a long time, you carried more than your share. You held emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. You compensated for gaps. You smoothed what others ignored. You stayed present, reliable, steady, even when the return was uneven. And you told yourself it was fine. Because that's what balanced souls do. They adapt, they adjust, they keep things moving. But over time, that kind of strength becomes heavy. Not in the muscles, in the spirit. There were years when your effort wasn't met halfway. When your contribution was acknowledged quietly, if at all. when you were essential, yet somehow invisible at the same time. That kind of imbalance leaves a mark, not as resentment, but as fatigue. You may not have noticed the exact moment it began to change. There was no argument, no dramatic ending, just a subtle shift in access. Something that once drained you no longer reaches you in the same way. Not because you hardened, but because your energy moved. This is important, Libra. The universe did not remove you violently. It didn't tear anything away. It didn't punish anyone. It simply repositioned you. Quietly, precisely, with intention. Like moving a piece on a board once the game has reached a new stage. And that is far more powerful than force. Because force creates resistance. But repositioning creates clarity. You might feel it now as distance, not coldness. Distance. A clean emotional boundary where there used to be overextension. A pause where there used to be automatic yes. A calm refusal to carry what isn't yours anymore. This isn't withdrawal, it's graduation. You're no longer meant to prove your worth by how much you can endure. You're no longer meant to stay in spaces where recognition arrives late and balance is always promised but never practiced. Let me ask you something gently here. When was the last time you felt truly met, not needed, not relied on, but met? If the answer feels distant, that's not a failure. That's information. Because this chapter didn't end to leave you empty. It ended to make room. Room for reciprocity, room for dignity, room for relationships and environments that don't require you to overfunction, just to belong. And here's the part I want you to really hear. You didn't walk away from this chapter. It closed around you. Not because you gave up, but because you outgrew it. There is a quiet strength in knowing you no longer need to explain your value or negotiate for fairness. As this realization settles, notice how the air feels a little lighter, how your shoulders drop without effort, how your breath deepens on its own. This is what happens when imbalance releases its grip. And as we move forward, you'll begin to sense what opens next. Not rushed, not forced. Just a steady unfolding into a position that finally reflects who you've become. Stay with that feeling. We're not done yet. Libra. This is the part that feels almost unreal when it first arrives. Not because it's big, but because it's quiet. There is no announcement. No moment where you stand up and declare that you've changed. And yet, people begin to respond to you differently. You may notice it in small, ordinary moments. A pause before someone speaks to you. A subtle shift in how your opinion is received. A door that opens without you having to knock twice. Nothing flashy. Nothing you could point to and explain. Just a feeling that the air adjusts when you enter the room. This is not a loud victory. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't need validation. It's the kind of rise that happens when your presence becomes undeniable without you ever raising your voice. Conversations change tone, not because you're trying to control them, but because people sense that you are no longer negotiating your worth. Your words land differently now. Not heavier. Clearer. And clarity carries. Wait. You didn't climb over anyone to get here. You didn't compete. You didn't push. You simply reached a point where your energy could no longer fit inside the role you used to play. That's an important distinction, Libra, because this rise isn't built on comparison. It's built on congruence. Who you are on the inside finally matches how you're positioned on the outside. There's something deeply grounding about that, something steady. You might even feel a strange mix of relief and unfamiliarity, like standing on higher ground without realizing the climb is over. And if part of you wonders, is this permanent? Let me answer you gently. This isn't about permanence. It's about alignment. When alignment happens, things don't need to be forced to stay. They stay because they fit. You'll notice that you're no longer chasing relevance, no longer explaining context, no longer shrinking your truth to keep the room comfortable. That doesn't mean you've become cold. It means you've become centered. And there's a quiet confidence that comes with that, the kind that doesn't seek attention but naturally draws respect. Have you felt that moment lately when you didn't rush to respond and realized you didn't need to? That pause, that calm, that knowing that's the sound of your position settling into place. This rise doesn't isolate you. It filters. Some connections deepen because they can meet you here. Others drift, not with conflict, but with clarity. And that's not loss, that's accuracy. Because the higher you stand in alignment with yourself, the less room there is for dynamics built on imbalance. You're not harder to reach now. You're just no longer available for what diminishes you. Take a moment and notice how that feels in your body. The steadiness, the grounded breath, the absence of urgency. This is what happens when power arrives quietly. And as you stand here, without fanfare, without explanation, something else begins to stir beneath the surface. Because once your position shifts, your perspective does too. And that shift, the one that changes how you see yourself and how you allow others to see you, that's where the next layer of this story begins. Libra, come a little closer for this part. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest in a way people rarely say out loud. There's something happening inside you that doesn't have a clean label yet. A feeling that arrives in quiet moments. When you pause longer than you used to. When you hesitate before responding. When you realize you're standing somewhere new, but you don't quite recognize the view. Here's what no one really talks about. Sometimes the universe moves you up before your confidence knows what to do with the new altitude. So if you've felt slightly disoriented lately, like your feet are on higher ground, but your nervous system is still adjusting, that's not a mistake. That's the transition. You may feel it as doubt that doesn't make sense, or a strange humility mixed with strength, or the question that drifts in quietly late at night. Am I really ready for this? And the answer is softer than you expect. You already are. You weren't late to anything, Libra. You didn't miss your moment. You weren't slow. You were being prepared. Prepared through experiences that taught you restraint, through seasons where you learned to listen instead of react, through long stretches where nothing seemed to move, but everything was shaping you. What you're feeling now is the after effect of growth, like muscles that are sore not because they failed, but because they were finally used in a new way. This is new territory for you. Not because you suddenly became someone else, but because you're no longer minimizing who you already are. And that can feel unfamiliar. You may notice that your old coping strategies don't work the same way anymore. Over-explaining feels unnecessary. Seeking validation feels empty. Even certain ambitions feel like they're quietly rearranging themselves. That's not confusion. That's recalibration. Let me ask you something gently here. When was the last time you allowed yourself to stand somewhere meaningful without immediately wondering if you deserved it? Sit with that question for a moment. There's no judgment in it, only awareness. Because the universe doesn't elevate you to test you. It elevates you when the testing phase is complete. And right now, what's being asked of you is not to prove anything, but to settle. To let your confidence arrive naturally, to let your nervous system catch up with your new position. To stop bracing for a fall that isn't coming. You are not standing on unstable ground. You're standing on accumulated wisdom. And it's okay if your confidence walks in slowly. It doesn't need to rush. It just needs to arrive. As you breathe here, notice how this realization changes the way you feel about yourself. Not bigger, not smaller, just more real. This is the moment where self-trust begins to replace self-doubt. Quietly, without ceremony. And as you grow into this place, you'll start to see that being placed isn't about pressure. It's about permission. Permission to inhabit your life fully. Permission to take up the space you've earned. Permission to move forward without shrinking first. And that awareness, that gentle settling into yourself, isn't the end of this story. It's the point where the next truth begins to reveal itself. Libra. This is where the shift becomes visible, not through announcements, but through reflection. Because when your inner position changes, relationships respond before words ever do. You may notice it in how people approach you now. Some lean in with curiosity. They feel your steadiness and find it grounding. Your growth reminds them of something possible within themselves. Others, though, feel uneasy. Not because you've done anything wrong, not because you became distant or cold, but because you stopped shrinking to fit spaces that no longer fit you. And that can be confronting. You see, Libra, for a long time, people knew how to relate to the version of you that softened edges, that adjusted tone, that made room even when it cost you. But now you're standing differently, not louder, just clearer. And clarity changes dynamics. Some connections will naturally rise with you. They meet you where you are without effort. Conversation flows. Respect feels mutual. There's an ease that doesn't need to be negotiated. Others will quietly drift. Not with conflict, not with drama, just with distance that feels strangely peaceful. That's not rejection. That's resonance sorting itself out. In love especially, this is where balance begins to return. Not the kind of balance where you compromise yourself to keep harmony alive, but the kind where both people can stand fully without losing their center. Either someone meets you where you stand now, with presence, respect, and emotional maturity, or they fade gently from your path. No chasing, no convincing, no explaining why you deserve to be met halfway. And that might feel unfamiliar at first, because you're used to bridging gaps, used to holding space, used to making things work. But alignment doesn't ask you to work harder. It asks you to stay honest. You may notice that you're less reactive now, less invested in proving your intentions, less willing to rescue dynamics that refuse to balance. That's not detachment, that's discernment. Let me ask you something softly here. When was the last time a relationship felt light because it didn't require you to manage it? That feeling, that ease, that mutual respect, that's your new baseline. And it doesn't mean you love less. It means you love from a place where you no longer abandon yourself in the process. Some people will celebrate that. Others won't know how to relate to it. Both responses are information. You are not here to be understood by everyone anymore. You are here to be met by those who can recognize balance without being taught. And as these dynamics settle, you'll notice something quietly beautiful happening. Your energy becomes less available to imbalance, not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. Relationships stop being something you maintain and start being something you experience, and that changes everything. As you sit with this, notice how your body responds to the idea of no longer chasing alignment. There's relief there. There's space. Because when alignment becomes the standard, respect follows naturally. And once respect is in place, a deeper truth begins to reveal itself. One that doesn't just change who you relate to, but how you relate to yourself. And that realization, the one that quietly reshapes your inner dialogue, is where the next layer of this story begins. Libra, slow your breath for this part. Not because something urgent is coming, but because clarity tends to arrive quietly, and you don't want to miss it. Over the coming days and weeks, life will begin to speak to you in subtle ways, not with grand announcements, not with pressure, but with small confirmations that land exactly where doubt used to live. You might receive a message at the right moment, a sentence that answers a question you never asked out loud, a response that confirms a decision you almost talked yourself out of. And when it happens, notice your body before your mind reacts. There will be a soft release in your chest, a sense of yes that doesn't need explanation. That's one of the signs. Another may come through timing that feels almost intentional. Opportunities appearing not when you're desperate for them, but when you're steady enough to recognize their value. Nothing rushed, nothing chaotic, just an invitation that feels calm instead of urgent. And that calm is important, Libra. Because what's unfolding now isn't asking you to move faster. It's asking you to move accurately. This isn't about speed. It never was. It's about placement. For a long time, you were being tested on endurance, on patience, on how much imbalance you could hold without breaking. But that phase is complete. You're no longer being measured by how much you can survive. You're being observed in a very different way now, not watched with judgment, but noticed with intention. How do you respond when things align instead of resist? How do you lead when you're no longer proving yourself? How do you choose when pressure is replaced with possibility? This is a new kind of attention, and you may feel it as a quiet responsibility settling in. Not heavy, just present. You're standing in a position where your choices matter differently now, not because you're above anyone, but because you're more centered within yourself. Pay attention to moments when you're invited to speak, and you don't rush to fill the silence. To opportunities where you're given time to decide, instead of being pushed to react. That's alignment responding to alignment. Let me ask you something gently here. When was the last time life trusted you with space instead of testing you with pressure? That shift is happening for a reason. You're learning how to move from a place of authority that doesn't need control, from leadership that doesn't announce itself, from confidence that doesn't rely on urgency. And as these signs appear, don't chase them. Don't analyze them to exhaustion. Just acknowledge them. A quiet thank you. A moment of recognition. A grounded choice made without fear. Because every time you respond from steadiness, your position settles more firmly. And that's what this phase is really about. Integration. Letting your inner alignment catch up with where you've been placed externally. There's no final exam here, no finish line to cross. Just a gradual unfolding into responsibility that feels earned, not forced. As you stay present with this, you may sense another realization beginning to rise. One that has less to do with the world around you and more to do with how you see yourself within it. That understanding doesn't rush in. It arrives when you're ready to hear it. And when it does, it will quietly close the last door behind you and open something deeper ahead. Stay with me. We're almost there. Libra. This is where everything softens. Not because the journey ends, but because the truth finally settles in your bones. No one saw this coming. Not the people who quietly underestimated you. Not the ones who leaned on your balance without ever learning how to hold their own. And if we're being honest here, not even you. Because you didn't rise the way the world usually measures success. You didn't announce your strength. You didn't force outcomes. You didn't demand recognition. You endured. You listened. You learned when to stay quiet and when to walk away without explanation. And somehow, in the middle of all that restraint, the universe moved you. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. You may still be catching up to that reality, that your position has already shifted, that certain doors are closed not as punishment, but as protection, that some paths no longer feel available because they were never meant to follow you forward. There's a strange mix of relief and disbelief that comes with this, a quiet thought that surfaces when you're alone. Is this really happening? Did I actually make it through that chapter? Yes, you did. And here's the part I want you to hear clearly. You are not standing where you are by accident. This isn't luck. This isn't timing alone. This is the result of every moment you chose integrity over impulse. Every time you stayed kind without becoming small. Every time you walked away from imbalance, even when it hurt. The universe responds to patterns, and your pattern changed. So now there's only one question left. Not one that pressures you, but one that invites you. Will you step into this new position fully? Or will you try to return to a place that only knows the old version of you? Because you can't unknow what you know now. You can't unfeel the clarity that's arrived. And you can't shrink back into spaces that no longer recognize your worth. Trust yourself, Libra. Not blindly, but quietly. Trust the way your body relaxes when you choose alignment. Trust the calm that replaces urgency. Trust the voice inside you that no longer begs to be heard. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. You are exactly where you are meant to be. And as this truth settles, you may notice something unexpected. A sense of gratitude for the version of you that survived the old chapter. And a gentle curiosity about who you're becoming now. There is no rush to define it. No pressure to perform it perfectly. Just an invitation to live from here. To choose relationships that meet you. To accept opportunities that respect you. To move through the world without constantly checking if you belong. Because you do. Take a breath with me here. Let it land. This isn't the end of your story, Libra. It's the moment you stop questioning whether you're allowed to stand in it. And whatever comes next will recognize you because you finally recognize yourself. Libra. Before you go, stay with this feeling for just a few more seconds. If something in this message surprised you, if a quiet yes moved through your chest, if you felt seen without having to explain yourself, that's not coincidence. That's alignment recognizing alignment. You didn't come here to be told who you are. You came here to remember. Remember that your balance is not weakness, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, that your silence was never empty. It was preparing you. So as this message settles, I invite you to do one simple thing. Check in with yourself. What shifted for you today? What truth landed more clearly than before? If you feel called, leave a comment below. Not to perform, not to prove anything, just to share what resonated. You never know who else in this Libra space needed to hear the same thing. If this message supported you, take a moment to like the video. It helps this energy reach the people who are quietly searching, just like you were. And if you're not subscribed yet, stay close. This journey isn't finished. The next message is already forming, and it will meet you exactly where you are. Most importantly, Libra, trust yourself. Trust the calm that's replacing urgency. Trust the position you've been guided into. You don't need to rush to understand it all at once. You're allowed to grow into it. Take care of yourself. Be gentle with what's unfolding. And remember, you're not walking this path alone. The journey continues.